Lord of the Rings, the most iconic and well-known story within the world of fantasy fiction. Probably one of the only series that has an adaptation held almost in as high regard as the books themselves. A timeless story of brotherhood, grief, hope, perseverance, courage, power, cruelty, evil and good, magic and war. The Lord of the Rings is in most ways a true masterpiece as it exists right now. There's been a lot of discourse about creatives taking liberties with Tolkien's work recently, mainly because of a little show that's popped onto the scene, but I'm not talking about Rings of Power today. I will probably give my thoughts once the season is over and people have calmed down a little bit, but for now I'd rather marinate my balls and put them on an ant's nest than get into that arena. But yeah, today we're talking about Lord of the Rings, and on the topic of getting creative with Tolkien's stories, I want to take a look at the magical world of fan fiction. What's shaking? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. I make lots of videos about fantasy books, so if that's your kind of thing, then I would love it if you stuck around. And also, just quickly, I want to say, for those of you that are new to the channel, I've gotten a bunch of new subscribers recently because of my collab with the Disheveled Goblin himself. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me the time of day over on Daniel's Fantasy News, and even more than that, thank you for coming and checking out my channel and sticking around. I really appreciate it. So fanfiction is mostly brought up in videos to kind of poke fun at it and take the mickey out of people that, let's be honest, they're just having fun. Just people trying to get creative and have a good time with stories that they love. I don't really have an issue with fanfiction. Yeah, a lot of it, even most of it, is silly, bad, and straight up horrifying at times. But the point of this video isn't to point and laugh. So recently, while I was procrastinating with my eyes glazed over, I somehow stumbled upon a bunch of forums about Lord of the Rings lore, and further down the rabbit hole I went, I ended up on pages and pages of fanfic covering alternate endings for Lord of the Rings, hypothetical sequels, prequels, and all the stuff in between. I want to talk about a few of them, particularly the ones that interested me the most, including one branch of this tree that I think technically is fan fiction, although maybe you disagree. I'm talking about non-canon Lord of the Rings games. So one of my all-time favorite video games growing up was The Lord of the Rings: The War in the North. I played it all the way through like 3 times with 2 of my mates, and this game isn't considered canon in an official sense, but one of the coolest things is that if you suspend your disbelief just a bit, you could imagine your characters are impacting the events that we see in the movies. So there's 3 of you. There's a man, a dwarf, and an elf, and you can kind of choose which one you want to play as. I know, man, elf, and dwarf seems inspired, but the idea of the game is that these 3 legends carry out missions across Middle-earth during the events of the movies, of the Great War. I say during the events of the movies rather than the book, because it feels like a lot of the stuff in the game was inspired more by the movies than the book. But it's really interesting because the game starts with you meeting Aragorn, who is posting up in the Prancing Pony waiting for Frodo to rock up with the ring. This game basically starts around the start of, again, The Lord of the Rings as we know it. It's rad because as you progress through the game, you hear about big things happening in other places. Big things that, again, we see in the story of The Lord of the Rings. Anyway, amazing game, about as fun as fanfic can really get. It's an original story, but set within the story that we already know. I would recommend you go play it, but I'm pretty sure War in the North is one of those games now where it's almost impossible to find. They've made it pretty much inaccessible, at least last time I checked, but if you manage to get your hands on it, go nuts. I'm sure you already know about the Shadow of Mordor franchise, and a lot of the same can be said. These games are technically non-canon, but super fun with how it weaves itself into the Lord of the Rings story that we already know. You play as a ranger who is killed and then revived and inhabited with the spirit of Celebrimbor, the elf that forged the Rings of Power. These 2 games actually take place before Lord of the Rings, pretty shortly before, considering the vast time spans involved when we're talking about this series. I think it's only about like 50 to 80 years before those stories, but if you know how these games actually end, then you do get a pretty cool treat that makes rewatching the movies or rereading the book even more fun, even if technically it's not connected, you know? So those are the games, but let's take a look at the straight up fan fiction, fictional stories written by true blue fans of the series. So I came across this thread called "If you were tasked to write the official sequel to Lord of the Rings series, how would the story go?" And the top voted response is a bit lengthy, so I'll summarize it. Basically, Nicholas Williams pitches that thousands of years after the events of The Lord of the Rings, the races of elves, dwarves, and pretty much every other fantasy monster has actually faded into legend, into myth. This world of Middle-earth now is a lot more familiar to more traditional non-fantasy medieval Europe type stories. The elves left Middle-earth to go to the Undying Lands, the dwarfs went underground, and the evil, orcs, all of that kind of stuff, were driven into pretty much extinction as the race of men spread out across Middle-earth. Without the evil around, and without the evil having a kind of overlord to guide them, men were able to expand across Middle-earth and grow prosperous and enjoy the peace of the Fourth Age. So then what happens is one of Aragorn's descendants, who are still part of the royal family of Gondor, gets bored with this everlasting peace. There's not much left to be discovered or explored, so he sets sail for distant lands. He sails out to the east, I believe it is. He travels for years, has lots of adventures along the way, and ends up at this completely uninhabited place. It's complete wilderness, and unlike where he came from, there is darkness here. There's ominous ruins and long abandoned structures and signs of bloodshed. Him and his men are thinking about leaving when suddenly they're approached by a tall figure in dark armor. Long story short, cutting to the chase, this stranger introduces themselves as an unknown and silent warrior of Morgoth. Essentially, this stranger's role was to lay low, kind of as a plan B in case everything else failed. So that's the conflict. Obviously it escalates from there and we see another kind of war come into effect. There's a pretty cool bit where we have Legolas actually come back from the Undying Lands with two new sons of Elrond to help advise them on what they might expect and to help them win this new war. The fanfic doesn't go into a whole lot of depth about what happens after this point. Again, it is more of a pitch. But all in all, I thought it was a super fun read. It was at least very interesting. I'm not going to be too critical because it is a fanfic. It is just a pitch after all. But at the end of the day, my main criticism would be that it feels like a lot of the same. Rather than a new original threat for this brand new Middle-earth, it feels a lot more like we're just dragging back something that's already been defeated. Even though it faded into legend, they've already defeated one of Morgoth's top dogs, Sauron, so I don't really think bringing back another Sauron clone is that exciting, if I'm being honest. Although I really, really love the idea of a Middle-earth that has grown complacent. Because this Fourth Age has known peace for so long now, again this is thousands of years later, because they've known peace for so long, they've grown too comfortable. There is no looming great evil anymore, to the point where those looming evils are just myth. I think it would be super interesting to see this world thrown into the deep end with a brand new threat. Maybe when this new threat shows itself, the armies of Middle-earth, the race of men, are completely underprepared, they're undertrained. They haven't really had a proper war within generations and generations. The people, the civilians, whatever, they've become too stubborn to believe that something this evil could even exist or be on the way. Anyway, still pretty cool. I'd love to hear what you think about this idea as a hypothetical sequel to Lord of the Rings, a post-Middle-earth. I think it was really interesting. I will of course leave a link in the description below to that post if you want to have a read for yourself. Some of the most fascinating fanfic that I've read was about what if insert blank got the ring, had taken the ring. And the most discussed one, of course, is Gandalf. That's the one that people like to speculate the most on what would happen if he had taken the ring. The funny thing is though, in the Lord of the Rings book, we're actually pretty much told what would happen if that were the case. "Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself." Sorry, my mistake for thinking I could do a good Gandalf impression. "Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity, pity for weakness and the desire of strength to do good." For me personally, I think that alludes to a kind of injustice situation, if you can forgive me for making a comparison between Lord of the Rings and DC. I imagine Gandalf would become corrupted in the sense that he would seek out evil in greater extremes as time went on, and he would respond to those evils with greater cruelty. I personally think that Gandalf would go from using that immense power to wipe out evil to becoming a bit of a tyrant himself for the sake of the greater good. And I don't think I'm special for thinking this. This is the direction that a lot of the fanfics I read follow. They pretty much go into that exact timeline of events. It's usually either that or it's Gandalf teaming up with Saruman for a big kind of tag team of destruction. Perhaps one of my favorite alternate ending fanfic actually comes from Tolkien himself in one of his infamous letters. These letters, man. If you even dare try to get thoughtful about anything in these stories that is even slightly vague or mysterious, you can bet your juicy buns that some sweaty fella is gonna burst through the door and just be like, actually in letter 487, Tolkien states that... Look, I'm just having a laugh, mate. But anyway, in one of his letters, Tolkien actually did say the following, talking about Smeagol's inner turmoil in regards to his affection for Frodo, which was very real, and the hold that the One Ring had on him, which I think most people would agree is a much more powerful kind of thing that he was dealing with. Tolkien says, certainly at some point, not long before the end, he would have stolen the ring or taken it by violence, as he does in the actual tale. But possession satisfied, I think he would have then sacrificed himself for Frodo's sake and have voluntarily cast himself into the fiery abyss. Basically, Tolkien theorizes that Smeagol would have, in a true moment of redemption, instead of truly becoming Gollum, he would have actually sacrificed himself and thrown himself into the fires of Mount Doom and been the one to ultimately end the Great War. I'm not saying I like this ending more. Personally, I think the original ending just works better. I think there's something really valuable about the fact that Frodo goes through so much, sacrifices so much, overcomes so much, and then kind of fails in the end to do the thing that he set out to do. But entertaining this alternate ending, there is something really cathartic about imagining the person who was arguably suffered the most over hundreds and hundreds of years of having the ring, or at least being tormented by the ring. There's something cathartic about him being the one to ultimately make the decision that ends the war, saves the day. He sacrifices himself. I think that's really sweet. Tolkien also toyed with an ending where Frodo throws himself into Mount Doom with the ring. Rather than choosing to keep the ring, he just kind of yeets himself into the lava. Tolkien theorized another ending where Frodo does fail. He keeps the ring, but he leaves and he essentially becomes one of the most metal little overlords you can possibly imagine. There are so many more fanfics when it comes to Lord of the Rings that I could talk about here, but I think I'll wrap it up here for today. If you would like me to do another video and talk about more of these fanfics, or even if you would like me to talk about fanfics from other series or books, please let me know. Just leave a comment below, or leave a comment letting me know what you think about any of the ones we've talked about already. Thank you so much for watching the video, especially for watching the whole thing. You are my favorite. Like I said, I make lots of videos on fantasy books, so if that's your kind of thing, then please do stick around. Otherwise, have a good one, mate, and I'll see you in the next one. Catch ya.